Good afternoon, class. This is the recording for 4-6, which would have been, I think, like our class, I want to say like 19 or 20, right? Either way, let's go over some of the things that we should have done up to this point, and then we can talk a little bit about today's lesson, which is proofreading techniques and also how to conclude your paper, which we've talked about a few times already, but it's worth a revision, a revisit, as it were, close to the end of the semester. One other thing I want us to get some time to do today is I've received a few questions via email from you guys that have been relatively repeated, so it just gives me information over things that I should just briefly cover in this so that if anyone's concerned about it, it seems to be a common trend, we can cover it together. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about where we should be with the paper. Okay, by this point, you should have essentially a completed draft, right? Or most of one, right? If you're almost done, that's close enough, right? What you're supposed to post for today is a mostly complete draft. As is the case for all in-class stuff, it's just going to be graded on a did you do it basis. And I'm not going to look at it and be like, I see this is only 4 pages, and I didn't ask for only 4 pages of it, so this draft isn't not mostly complete. No. Much in the same way that previous peer review sort of things have gone, the more that you're able to turn in, the more that someone can give you feedback on, right? So for Wednesday, of course, you guys are supposed to give each other peer review feedback on on at least one posted paper, of course. So the more that you can put up, the better, okay? But with that being said, and being this far into it, and with us not being able to really sit in the classroom and like talk to each other about it, I think it's a good chance for us to talk about other opportunities we have to cover peer-reviewed options in terms of, or rather, proofreading options that we can employ ourselves, right? Some of these are going to sound really basic or silly, but I promise you they are actually rather effective. So let's go over a couple of those, okay? First things first, you guys have the rubric, right? Like you can look at the rubric on the assignment sheet, you know exactly what the questions I'm going to ask are, and therefore you can just work from there, okay? You can look at them, decide, am I doing this thing that it asks? If not, well, that's obviously a problem area you need to fix. If so, do you think you're honestly doing it well? Now, being able to ask yourself and answer those questions honestly in an informed way is something that just takes practice, right? And the point of us getting to there in this class is to start you on the path to understanding and being able to be honest with yourself about your work, okay? There's some other kind of tricks we can do to clear up, for example, surface level issues, especially like grammatical or syntactical things, okay? The most basic one, and this is going to sound very silly, is read the paper out loud, right? And I don't mean just sit there and like reading and be like, all right, post the introduction, you know, just like mumbling through it, right? Sit there, look at the paper, and read it out loud. Preferably to someone else if you can, but if we're all social isolating and you don't really feel like calling up a friend for this, out loud to yourself is fine, right? Take note of a couple specific things, okay? One, right, if you ever hit part of your paper where you audibly stumble, right, even if, you know, as it is on the page, it seems right, or you can like recover from it and just reread it, just put a little mark there and come back to it, right? Usually what that means is some part of the paper and the way it's written there is tripping you up and you're expecting some other wording that isn't there. So it might trip up a reader who isn't you who comes around to look at the work after, so it might be worth rewording, okay? Another one that's really common is, for example, let's say you're reading and you find yourself running out of breath in one section. It's very, excuse me, it's very long, right, and you're running over it and you're just like, oh my god, there's just so many words. Well, okay, that means you probably have to break things up, okay? If you're reading and you're noticing it's really choppy and short, you need some longer sentences in there. Mix up the syntax a little bit, okay? This is not in a real world sense a long paper, but it isn't a short paper either, okay? If you were reading something and it was written in a very cut and dry, samey and homogeneous way all the way through the paper, i.e., the patterns of the sentences are all the same. It's just subject, verb, object, like no changes, nothing interesting about the syntax. You'd get bored with the pacing and you would disengage, right? You don't want your reader to do that, obviously. So reading it out loud helps you get a feel for the pace of the paper and the flow of how the words move in like a syntactical sense, which is something that you want to start paying attention to, okay? So that's option one, right? Read it out loud. Okay, the second option kind of comes off the heels of this, and it's more for identifying sentence by sentence level issues, right? You read the paper out loud, sentence by sentence, starting from the last one and working to the top. What this does is it stops us kind of just like running over parts of it as we just read out loud and talk. You have to look at each sentence and read it and make sure each sentence functions correctly. These are two really basic ways to do it, okay? Check your paragraphing, right? We've talked in the past about when an appropriate time to break a paragraph is, namely that it should be every time an idea changes. You brought up a new piece of evidence, probably a new paragraph, okay? Remember, this shouldn't look like a 5-paragraph essay. There might be 5 grander sections, but there better be more than 5 actual paragraphs, okay? If you're condensing everything into 5 just basic paragraphs, you probably have an organizational issue with the paper, okay? Next, another interesting thing for us to talk about kind of on the heels of that, okay? I've received a lot of questions about how citations work in this. We've talked a lot about that in class, not as much as I would have liked us to, because usually that's what we'd be spending a lot of time on now, so it's good to cover it, okay? Obviously, whenever you bring up a source, right, you have to cite to it, and this isn't just a citation in the works cited, it also obviously means in-text citations, those little parenthetical citations we see in MLA, okay? This includes your primary research, right? If you're confused how to cite to an interview or things like that, if you go to OWL at Purdue, the On-Ride Writing Lab at Purdue, right? They have an MLA section. They will literally tell you for any type of source exactly how the citation needs to work. That citation needs to be on your works cited, and when you cite to it, when you pull info or quotes from it, you need to cite to it directly. Remember, we talked about this previously too. You don't only put citations when you have quotations, right? It's also when you paraphrase, and it's also when you summarize. Whenever the idea at play is not distinctly yours, you must say where it came from, okay? The other reason this is important is it brings up the fact that if something shows up on your works cited page, which there should be at least 7 things on there, and at least one of them needs to be your field research, as we've talked about, if I get to that page and not all of those things actually get cited in the text, it's not a works cited page. You failed in citations in some way. Those 7 things need to show up in the paper and be directly pointed to in some way. So keep that in mind, right? It's not just 7 things that I happen to read, but I only cited to 3 of them. That's the difference between a works cited page and a bibliography. Bibliography is things you read. Works cited is things you cited to. You must cite to 7 things in this, one of which must be your field research. So keep that in mind, okay? One last thing I want us to talk about for where we're heading next, right, to keep this video relatively short, okay? The next step that we have going into next week, right, the paper is due on the 13th, right? So it's due Monday by midnight, okay? Which means you have this whole week to reach out to me if you have any specific questions. Understand that I'm asking for specific questions, okay? Sending me the paper and just saying, can you look at this, is, if all of you did that, I'd essentially end up having to grade them twice. No, right? Is there something specific you're worried about in there, right? What that shows me as your instructor is that you've thought about it a little bit and like done a little bit of work to figure out what stuff's going on. Just giving me a paper and being like, what you think, right? It doesn't really help. And it's not really giving me a direction in what sort of feedback you are looking for. The other thing to understand is if you just send me a paper and ask me to look at it, I won't tell you like, this will probably get an A, you know, like, oh, you know, if you fix this, you're definitely going to get an A. I won't give you any information on where you fall in the grade spectrum because, as we've discussed in class, it's kind of graded comparatively across the board, right? I have a benchmark where I think everyone should at least hit, and then that adjusts based on how everyone's doing, right? So if I can't give you a fair answer to that, and I wouldn't anyway tell you what your grade is before I've sat down and graded all the papers. It's not fair. So keep that in mind. I'm going to be changing the visual rhetoric assignment, which we will be starting. We'll be starting to look at next week, right? On the 13th, right? I'll put a new video instruction lecture like this up and a new assignment sheet. It's going to be a bit more topical and honestly easier for us to do just because this is a crazy semester. Obviously, less work, the better. It still hits the benchmarks that we need. If you guys need anything over the rest of the week, let me know. We can set up a WebEx or a Zoom or a Discord call or anything, right, if you need to have a conversation with me. Otherwise, send me specific questions and I try to get back to them. Remember, give me around 24 hours. I know for me, and I'm sure for plenty of you guys, time sort of has lost all meaning in this, so try to set an alarm or something to remind yourself to get the paper uploaded by the Monday at midnight to the appropriate part of the Dropbox, okay? I hope you guys are doing well. Stay healthy, stay safe, right? Now that I think about it, conclusion. I should reiterate this. We did talk about it, right? But remember the specific thing that your conclusions need to do, right? I should know what we talked about, a more stretched out, essentially a summary of the paper, right? Like, we talked about this. I showed you that this is the solution by A, B, C, and D. And then remember the big thing to end with is that call to action, where you tell your audience to go and actually implement the solution, okay? With that being said, right now, actually, I hope you guys are doing well. Stay safe, stay healthy. Contact me if there's anything going on. I'm going to be going through and updating all the gradebook stuff over the course of the week to make sure everyone's still around. With that being said, I miss you guys. Stay well, stay healthy, and thanks.